I remember the day it all started like it was yesterday. It was one of those quiet, lazy afternoons in the village when the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows on the ground. I was sitting by the fire, sharpening my knife, when I overheard two old men talking. "She's the one, you know," one of them whispered, his voice barely above a breath. "Every man wants a taste of her, if they can get close enough." I didn't know who they were talking about. The village was small, and we all knew each other. There were no secrets. Not really. But this felt different. The way they spoke, it was as if they were talking about something more than just a woman. There was something dark in their words. Later that evening, I saw her for the first time. Her name was Amina. She wasn't from our village, but she came to live with her aunt a few months back. She was beautiful, but not in the way you'd expect. There was something unsettling about her. She walked with a grace that made people stop and stare, but there was a coldness in her eyes, like she was somewhere far away, even when she was standing right in front of you. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, people in the village talk all the time. Gossip is just part of life. But as the days passed, things started to feel off. It began with the men. It seemed like every single one of them, young and old, had their eyes on her. At first, they just watched her from a distance, but soon, the looks turned into whispers, and then, whispers turned into rumors. "She's got magic in her," one man said late one night, his face pale as if he had seen something he couldn't explain. "You're a fool if you don't take a taste," another man laughed, slapping his friend on the back. "She won't be around for long." I didn't understand. Why were they all so obsessed with her? What was it that made Amina so different? I didn't believe in witchcraft or magic, but as the days passed, the air in the village felt thicker, heavier. Men started following her around, always watching, always waiting. It wasn't long before I saw one of them make his move. It was Kofi, the strongest man in the village. He was known for his pride, for his ability to get whatever he wanted. That evening, I saw him walking towards Amina as she was by the river, collecting water. I thought about stopping him, but something made me hesitate. He was confident, sure of himself. But when he reached her, something happened that made my blood run cold. Amina didn't look up. She didn't even seem to notice him. But Kofi kept talking to her, his voice low, almost like he was trying to charm her. She just stood there, silent, unmoving. Then, out of nowhere, Kofi grabbed her arm. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. But what happened next made me wish I had done something. A dark cloud seemed to appear over the river. It wasn't the kind of storm clouds we get in the rainy season. No, these clouds were different. They were heavy, almost alive. I saw the light dim as the shadows from the cloud crept over the ground. Amina turned her head slowly, and when her eyes met Kofi's, I swear I saw something inside her change. It was like the light in her eyes flickered, then disappeared. Kofi's grip on her arm tightened, and that's when I heard it. A voice, low and guttural, coming from the shadows. It wasn't Amina's voice, but it was coming from her mouth. The voice said something in a language I couldn't understand, but the tone, it sounded like a warning, a threat. Kofi froze, his face turning pale. Then, in a sudden flash, he let go of her arm and stumbled backward, his eyes wide in terror. He turned and ran, not looking back, not even for a second. The clouds above her vanished, and the world seemed to breathe again. That night, I stayed in my hut, heart pounding. I heard the whispers outside, men talking about what had happened. Some said Kofi was cursed. Others said Amina had some kind of power, a power that made men do crazy things. I didn't know what to believe, but I knew something had changed. The days that followed were even worse. The men of the village were obsessed with her, more than ever. They started showing up outside her hut at all hours, waiting for her to come out, hoping she'd notice them. It was like they were waiting for her to choose one of them, to give them a taste of whatever power she held. One evening, I saw a group of men standing outside her hut. They were whispering to each other, eyes darting nervously. Then, without warning, they stormed in. I don't know what they thought they'd do, but when they came out, they were different. Their faces were pale, their bodies trembling. They wouldn't talk about what happened inside, but I could tell something had broken them. I had to know. I couldn't stay in the dark any longer. So, one night, I followed her. She didn't know I was there. hiding in the shadows, watching her. She walked out of her hut and down towards the river again. I waited for a while, unsure of what I was doing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to find out. Then I saw it. Amina wasn't alone. There were figures in the water, shadows, moving just beneath the surface. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but as I watched, I saw the figures rise up from the water, like they were being pulled to the surface. They were men, but not in the way we are. Their bodies were twisted, their faces pale and featureless, as if they had been drowned long ago. Amina spoke to them in that strange, guttural language, and the figures, the men who had drowned, they answered her. They moved with a purpose, like they were waiting for her command. That's when it hit me. All the men in the village, they didn't want a taste of her. They wanted to be with her. They wanted to be like the men in the water, like the drowned souls who followed her every word. I couldn't stay any longer. I ran back to the village, my heart racing. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. I couldn't. No one would believe me. But from that night on, I watched every man who went near her. I saw their eyes, empty and desperate. I saw them all trying to get closer, trying to take that taste, whatever it was, that would make them part of her. But the truth is, no one can take anything from her. Not really. Because once you get close enough, you don't leave. You become one of them, one of the drowned souls, following her into the depths of whatever power she holds. I don't know if I'll make it out of here alive, but if you're reading this, and you're near a village like mine, be careful. Some things, some people, they're better left alone, because every man in the village wanted a taste of her, and none of them ever came back. The taste is never enough. I should have left the village long before it all spiraled out of control, but I didn't. And now, I can't seem to escape it. It's like the village is alive in its own way, watching me, waiting. It's hard to explain, but I can feel it in the air, the land, even in the water that flows from the river where Amina spends so much time. After that night by the river, I knew something darker was at play. The village felt cursed. The ground beneath my feet seemed to shift, like something old was waking up, something that had been asleep for generations. But it wasn't until the men started disappearing that I realized how deep this went. At first, it was subtle. One man would go missing for a day, then two. He'd return, but not the same. His eyes were distant, like he wasn't all there. People whispered that Amina had taken a part of him, but I never understood what that meant. Was it just a metaphor, or was there something more? Then it started happening more often. Men who went to see her didn't come back. If they did, they were never themselves again. Some of them wandered into the forest, staring into the trees as if searching for something they'd lost. Others sat in the square, rocking back and forth, mumbling in that strange language I had heard Amina speak. No one wanted to go near them. We all knew what had happened, but no one said it out loud. We were all afraid. The worst part was, the village didn't do anything. It was like they were all under some kind of spell. Amina had a way of making the whole place go quiet, as if the world outside of her and the men who followed her didn't exist. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't just sit by and watch as the village became empty, one soul at a time. So, one night, I decided I would confront her. I waited until the moon was high in the sky, casting its pale light across the village. The fire pits were dim, the streets empty. Everyone was either too scared or too entranced by Amina to care about anything else. I grabbed a small knife and made my way down to the river, the same way the others had. As I got closer, I saw her. Amina was standing at the water's edge, her back to me. She was facing the river, her hands lifted as if she was waiting for something, or someone. I stayed hidden behind a tree, too scared to approach her directly. I didn't know what she was capable of, but I had a feeling it was something I didn't want to find out. Then, something caught my eye. In the water, I saw movement, figures. Not just one, but several. The men. I recognized their faces now. Kofi was there, and many others who had gone missing weeks ago. They were standing in the water, their bodies covered in a dark, slick substance, their faces unreadable. Their eyes were wide, and yet, empty, like they were looking right through me. Amina didn't turn. She just spoke to them, softly, like she was coaxing them back into the depths of the river, and they obeyed her, slowly submerging themselves beneath the water, disappearing without a sound. I should have left right then, but I couldn't. It was like I was drawn to her, to the dark power that surrounded her. Then she spoke. You're still here, aren't you? Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the night like a blade. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. How did she know I was here? I see everything, she continued, her tone colder now. You're all the same. You think you can take a taste and walk away, but you don't understand. Her voice grew sharper. You can never leave once you've had a taste of me. I felt something shift in the air, and for a moment, I thought I saw her turn toward me, though her face remained hidden in the darkness. Then I heard it, the sound of the river moving more violently, as though something was rising from beneath the surface. Amina raised her arms higher, and the figures in the water stirred again. This time, they didn't just move, they swam toward the shore, their twisted bodies crawling out of the water like monsters. They were the men who had disappeared, but they weren't human anymore. Their skin was stretched tight over their bones, their eyes vacant and clouded. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was trapped in the moment, unable to look away. Every man wants a taste of me, Amina whispered, stepping closer. And once you taste me, you're mine. She lifted her hand, and one of the drowned men lunged at me. I barely managed to sidestep him, but I felt a cold hand brush against my shoulder, sending a jolt of ice through my body. It was as if I could feel the weight of the men's souls pressing down on me. But Amina wasn't finished. She stepped forward, her face still hidden in the shadows, and I saw her smile. A cold, knowing smile. Your village is full of men who can't stop themselves, she said, her voice now full of mockery. They come to me, they think they can handle it, but they always lose. I had to move, I had to run, but I couldn't. Amina stepped even closer, and I felt something inside me begin to change. My thoughts were no longer my own. I could feel the pull, the desire to walk into the river, to join the others who had been lost forever. But then, something broke through the fog in my mind. It was a memory, a flash of the old men in the village, their voices warning me. They had seen it all before. I fought back, pushing against the darkness that was trying to take me. I turned and ran. I don't know how, but I made it back to the village. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I looked around at the men who still walked the streets, their eyes dull, their movements slow. They were already lost, and I was next. I wanted to tell someone. I wanted to warn them, but I knew better. No one would believe me. Amina's power was too strong. She had already taken too much, and now, I could feel it, deep inside me. The taste was starting to take hold. If you're ever near a village like mine, remember this. Stay away from the water. Stay away from Amina, because once you've tasted her, you'll never escape.